we're all just like, ooh.
There you go. Hi, everyone, and happy Mental Health Awareness Month. My name is Lauren, and I'm going to be hosting this month's live stream from Saluna, the mental health Gen Z app by Kooth. So as you guys probably know, Gen Z has gained a reputation for being more inclined to talk about mental health and awareness than any other previous generation, especially on social media. They're changing the game by acknowledging the importance of getting support, going to therapy, and destigmatizing the silent battles that a lot of us face. I'm Lauren, like I said, I'll be hosting, and I'm also joined by Maia and Marjhoree. How are you guys doing?
Doing good, and yourself?
Doing great.
I'm doing well, thanks for asking, guys. So Maia is known as Sad Pixie Girl on TikTok and Starry.Maia on Instagram. Maia, will you tell us a little bit about your pages?
Absolutely. So for TikTok, I try to make content related to mental health or just my personal feelings about anything, which often I feel ties back to mental health. Whatever I'm feeling for the day, and I'm always grateful when my videos resonate with anybody. And on Instagram, it's more of just me being myself, kind of like the highlight reels of what I like to do with my time, but also I post my art on there. So yeah, those are my two platforms.
Love it. Marjhoree, will you tell us a little bit about your platforms? I know you run a supportive online sisterhood on Instagram called @girlgetup.org, and you have a personal TikTok too, right?
Yes. So it's kind of the opposite of Maia on TikTok. I like to share my highlights of my personal, kind of just like day in the life, family, um, and hobbies and things like that. And on Instagram, it's more of advocating for mental health awareness, especially and Gen Z generation and women of color. So kind of just speaking up for that, and things that people don't want to talk about. We talk about some really good gems on there to help navigate through tough times.
I absolutely love it. You guys are two powerful and important Gen Z mental health creators in the online space. I loved going through your pages. Everyone watching, you should go check out their pages. But that brings us to the discussion today of Gen Z standing on business, Gen Z doing what hasn't been done by any previous generation, bringing awareness to these issues, acknowledging that they are issues, and then talking about how we can get help. So Saluna actually did a discussion user poll on their app. The question that we asked was, what's your go-to source for mental health support? And it looks like friends and family, being mental health support, was rated the highest at 51%. Therapy or counseling was rated at 28%, which amazing that it got higher than 20%. And social media or online communities was 21%. In real life support groups was 0%. Maia, Marjhoree, what do you guys think of these results, and why do you think they turned out the way they did?
I think that, first of all, it's fascinating to me also that therapy or counseling kind of beat social media just with the poll percentages. I think that friends and family are very approachable when it comes to talking about your mental health. And it doesn't always have to be like fully transparent conversations. It can just be how you felt about the day, like what you're going through. I think that all ties into mental health. So if you're seeing your friends daily, or if you're living at home with your parents, or you're very close with siblings, it makes sense to me that that's kind of where you share the most. As for therapy and counseling, I think that number is a bit higher than we expected because of how normalized therapy has become for our generation, which is actually incredible to see considering how difficult it can be, like to access it, because I know it can be expensive, but I just think it's amazing that our generation has listed therapy as a priority in a lot of ways. Yeah, and social media definitely is an excellent resource for mental health. And there's several creators that I follow who do counseling themselves and like to share gems. So I think that not being too far behind therapy kind of serves as a way for people to get advice, like young people to get advice without necessarily having the money to go to therapy or counseling. I think it could be a great resource.
I agree with that. And I do feel like finding social media pages that you resonate with and see a lot of relatable content on could be the first clue as to you having a mental illness like ADHD or OCD. I'm not telling people to go on and self-diagnose, and we'll talk a little bit about the dangers of that later, but I do feel like it can be a stepping stone for people to eventually choose to go to therapy because they find an answer to something that they've been struggling with. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Marjhoree, what are your thoughts on the poll?
Yeah, I was also surprised at how high the number is for therapy or percentages for therapy or counseling, at 28%, because I know that, like, just being in the community, there are a lot of people who can't afford therapy. And I like to see the 21% on social media and online communities, because for people who can't afford therapy, I'm happy that they can find a safe place online to kind of get some tools, or um, maybe they can afford therapy, but their therapist has a long wait list and they're in need of crisis at this moment. So I think it's really good, to have that platform on social media or an online community where they can access if they're feeling like stressed or anxious, or not so necessarily like 911 crisis, but kind of just looking at something on social media that can give them a different perspective, or space change, as I like to say. And then also, like, 51% friends and family. I was really surprised about that. I know growing up, just from my personal experience, I really didn't want to talk about my mental health challenges with my friends and family. So I was super surprised at that number. That's awesome. And then the 0%, the in real life support groups, I was really surprised at that, because there's nothing like an in-person exchange and that in-person support. I love social media and online, but I also think it's essential to have a healthy balance of support in person too, because you can kind of feel like, hey, she's not looking like herself today, or she's not feeling like herself today in person. So I think it's important to have that healthy balance, in real life and social media as well.
I agree. I love all of the points you brought up. To bring it a little bit back to social media being helpful for those who can't afford therapy. Fortunately, we have a lot of therapists, like certified licensed therapists, who create social media pages and make reels and TikToks talking about different diagnoses, talking about different symptoms, talking about how to cope with different problems that come from depression or anxiety. And that's super useful for, again, people who cannot yet afford to go to therapy. I do know that social media is also promoting ads, though, for more affordable options out there. Different apps you can download and different virtual kinds of therapy that can be more affordable through monthly subscriptions and stuff like that. So I do think it's trying to help people the best that it can. We still have areas we can improve, obviously, because everyone should be able to afford therapy. But I think the resources that do exist are good as long as we continue to keep growing them. And I also was surprised by the 51% for friends and family, because growing up, I was told mental health wasn't real and it wasn't a thing, and I was like making it up. So to me, I never felt comfortable, and to this day, I still don't feel very comfortable going to my family about mental health stuff. Friends, though, I would, because I have ADHD. I have a lot of friends that have ADHD. They understand the struggle. My roommates have ADHD. We're able to like live together and understand when someone leaves dishes and doesn't think about it because of, they're having that kind of day. So I think it's super helpful, like you said, that if we had more in real life support groups that were made up of friends, that we could like get together, have a designated time once a week or once a month to talk and check in with each other. I wish that wasn't at 0%. We could get it higher. Now, Gen Z gets a lot of flack, right, for talking about mental health. And I almost feel that the older generation blames us for using mental health as an excuse to be lazy or to not want to work, to not want to do X, Y, or Z. But statistically, it is shown that Gen Z has feelings of depression at 42%. So it's double what it is for those in America over the age of 25. And they've reached a very high level with anxiety, 61% having been medically diagnosed with an anxiety condition. The difference, I think, is that we're not just calling out on social media the fact that we struggle with mental health. We're also, like you said, talking about resources. Gen Z is more likely than any other generation to get help. We have 40% of Gen Zers that were surveyed said they attended therapy regularly, and 53% have sought professional mental health services at some point. So we're making change. We're not only talking about the problems that we have, and we're not talking about it in a pity party kind of context. We're talking about it in a way where it's like, hey, I struggled with this. I found these solutions. I want to offer you the same kind of help if you struggle with the same thing. Why do you guys think it's important to be vulnerable online?
Well, I would say, what I like to say is there's strength in vulnerability. So the perception that you have at home or in your everyday real life community might not be the perception that you're getting on social media. I was just talking to Maya about this. TikTok and Instagram and Facebook, social media, you build a community of your own niche. And I think when we're talking about mental health awareness on social media, um, some people will be like, hey, I feel I can relate to that too. I can relate to that too. And then here you go, a couple weeks later, or even overnight, you've built a community to where you feel safe and vulnerable. And because you're exchanging transparency and authenticity with one another. And I like that it builds community, and that I like to say that there's healing through friendships and just even meeting people on social media. I think that's really important because your day to day, like in work or at school, is not always gonna be what it is on social media. And so when you're willing to be authentic and put yourself out there, it's almost like a call to the universe, like responding with people there that can relate to you, and it makes you feel more comfortable. So I think that's very important. If you have something to say it, and your people or your community, your tribe, they will find you, and you guys can lean on each other, even if it's virtually.
Absolutely. I agree with that 110%. As a TikTok creator myself, I get a lot of people in my DMs who share that a lot of the skits or songs that I make help them through experiences they've had in their childhood where they can relate to the experiences I'm talking about. And just feeling less alone and like someone else understands you does wonders for mental health, because most people want to be empathized with, right? They just want to feel understood. So I feel like the more we can allow ourselves to be vulnerable online, the more we can see how alike we all are. And that can also help with breaking down stereotypes, right? And these ideas that we have about certain people. And it can help build community. Maya, what are your thoughts?
I agree with everything that y'all said. I think what's so interesting about this generation is like, I think for me, I was probably 18, 19 years old, and this was like 2018, 2019, just very like unaware of the things that were going on with me internally after coming out of a pretty rough situation. So when you're going through things like that and you can't like vocalize or kind of create that verbiage for yourself in your own mind, you get on the internet and it could be something like a meme, where it's like, when you do this and this and this, and you're like, oh my gosh, like I didn't know other people did that. Humor can be the gateway in a lot of ways, and it was for me. And then that just kind of starts this deep dive into other people's experiences via TikTok and now Instagram a lot more as well. So I think social media is very vital to our generation and just understanding each other's experiences and like finding relatability with our experiences is a huge thing. I also have ADHD and CPTSD, and 5 years ago, I wouldn't have been able to go on Instagram and find a licensed therapist who has a page dedicated to my mental disability. And it's amazing to scroll through and be like, I'm not the only one going through this, even though at certain times I felt so alone. So that
Right.
kind of visibility, and for people to be educated about something that wasn't common knowledge 2 years ago is amazing. And I think it's amazing that we have that now as adults. I think it's amazing for kids to have that as well, because you can't always vocalize those things to your family, and you don't always know how to vocalize it to yourself or your friends. So
Right. Absolutely. I love what you said about how 5 years ago, finding pages dedicated to your mental disability wouldn't have been a thing. And now there's like a plethora of them, right? There's so many creators. And it's not only that they're offering different advice or different coping mechanisms, but the way they choose to present it is also different. You have some therapists that go on and make skits. You have some therapists that tell story times, right? It's all different in the way they present it. And I feel like it's such a great space because it merges creativity with teaching and being educational, and that's what we need more of on social media. Maya, you had mentioned that what you also struggle with ADHD, and so I wanted to bring up the question that you put in our brief of how does being neurodivergent play a role in navigating mental health challenges? Because being neurodivergent is a mental illness in and of itself. But if you're dealing with another mental illness, you mentioned you also have CPTSD and you have to treat that in addition to your ADHD. I have OCD and have to treat that in addition to my ADHD. Having ADHD can make it so difficult to treat any mental illness because especially if you have a routine with taking medication or you have a routine with going to therapy each week or anything like that. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts on that were.
I have a lot of thoughts on this.
Please share all of them.
Yes. I remember learning that I had CPTSD maybe like 3 years ago, and then learning that I had ADHD last year. So I wouldn't say it's too late in life, but definitely later than diagnosis happened for a lot of people. I think that it kind of feels like you have this like mixture of all this stuff going on. So it's like, I want to learn how to heal and work on my healing and build these good routines for myself and practice speaking to myself positively. But at the same time, as an anxious person, I'm an overthinker. At the same time, having ADHD gives me executive dysfunction. So sometimes it's difficult to do the tasks I need to do, be it journaling or cleaning or even just showing up at work the way I want to function throughout the day. So I think that navigating the world that's not built for neurodivergent people is difficult. And I think that those of us who have ADHD or even ADHD and OCD, ADHD, CPTSD, or a lot of things overlap as well.
Right.
I think it requires a lot of resilience, and I think it requires a lot of talking to people. I think we need to
Right.
talk to people. I need to talk to people. I think it's a lot. I could say a lot about it.
I have this question that I often talk about with my roommate who also has ADHD, and it's a question of, do you ever wonder how much more successful or better with money or more ahead in life you could have been if you had been diagnosed with ADHD or whatever mental illness you struggle with at a younger age, and if you could have gotten it properly treated? And I think that's a very sad thing to think about because I personally think I would have been more ahead if I had I also got diagnosed with ADHD a year ago. So, as an adult, it's kind of like, well, I've lived with it this long, and you think that you can keep doing it and doing it, but as you get older, it actually gets worse. So if I could have navigated that earlier in life, but then I think, was there really any way to treat it or any sort of quote unquote cure back when I was a child? when I would have been diagnosed. So I'm just glad we're making the strides now and learning how to cope with it and treat it either through medication or through other ways that we go about our day. Marjhoree, I wanted to bring up your question now that you had put in the brief, because I think it's so important, and I want both of your opinions on this. How can we approach mental health in a way that's inclusive and intersectional, specifically as it relates to queer and Black identities? So I don't know where to start with this, because of course I'm not a queer or a Black identity. I'm white Hispanic. You know, I grew up in a Hispanic household. My Hispanic family has their own idea of what mental health is, and I could talk about that. But I want to hear from you guys. What would you want to say on that topic, or what do you think is important for people to hear?
I think there is a boundary that I have to set with myself when I talk about the experience of African American mental health and bringing it into a space with someone with a different experience, because we have all these things of DEI, diversity and inclusivity, and we want to include everyone, but we also want to be mindful and respectful of other people's experiences. So, because while I love to stand up, for my rights and everything, when we talk about like the things that happen with George Floyd, and we talk about the things that happen with police brutality, and we can go back to slavery, and we can go back to like the trauma of Black men, and it's really tough to express those feelings and experiences behind it, but while also setting a boundary of being respectful of someone else's experience who hasn't really experienced that yet. And I just want to say, for me, because I am a big advocate of therapy, but it took me a long time to find a really good therapist that I connected with. And I think this goes with everyone's experiences. You want to connect with a therapist that you feel connected with, aligned with, because you want to make sure that you're walking away with something and it's impactful, and you're feeling fed, and you kind of just don't want to tell everyone or tell someone all the details of your life, and you're feeling like they can't relate to you, if you get what I'm saying. So I feel like I'm happy that there's so many more professionals, mental health professionals, getting into the field, because there's a lot of people need people, and we also need people who are professionally trained in areas. Like I just met a therapist yesterday. She said that her clients are cancer patients. And so she only takes people that have dealt with cancer, and I don't have that experience, but she's been to school and she's been trained to deal with those emotions and things that are going through in those stages. Just imagine you getting with a therapist that has been dealing with the space of people going through cancer, and you're like, okay, I kind of can't relate here. Or someone being at that stage and needing someone to relate and be trained in that stage of their life. So I think it goes back with just being intentional on connecting with someone who has your experience, and even if they don't have your experience, just making sure that you guys feel connected, so that you can walk away feeling impactful, and that they provide an open space for you to be transparent and vulnerable and feel comfortable. Because I'm just being transparent here. I'm not going to release how I'm feeling if I don't feel comfortable in the space, or if I feel like you can't relate to me.
Right. Absolutely. There's so many important pieces of advice in what you said. And I think what's truly beautiful about it is when you said to be intentional, and also have patience with yourself as you're searching for the right therapist. Searching for the right therapist can be so aggravating and frustrating because
Like a
you have
unicorn.
yeah, you have all these 15-minute initial calls and you're like trying to give your life story and seeing if you would be a good fit. So to anyone out there who's looking into getting therapy, just be intentional, like Marjhoree said, and also have patience with yourself. It is worth the patience to find the right therapist. And I just love how this points back to how the mental health field is growing to have different professionals who specialize in different things. For me, I had been to a few different types of therapy, like just talk therapy, or I can't remember the names off the top of my head. I've been talk therapy. I'd been one that dealt with directly with OCD, which was helpful. I had, in the beginning, when I didn't know how to look for therapy properly, and my parents were just kind of throwing me to whatever therapist accepted our insurance, I ended up going to a therapist that specialized with helping LGBTQ plus youth, which I was not. So complete mismatch, right? So I totally understand what the example that you gave. But it wasn't until I found a therapist that specialized in inner child work and internal family systems that I was able to nail down what I needed to heal about my childhood trauma, which was at the core of a lot of the mental illnesses I was dealing with. So I think it's totally worth the time and totally worth the research to find the therapist that matches up with you, especially because the field is expanding to include so many different specializations and so many different forms of therapy. Maia, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
My ADHD brain wants me to ask you to repeat the question so I can remember.
I absolutely can, because it's been a while since I said it. So
Yeah.
sure. How can we approach mental health in a way that's inclusive and intersectional, specifically as it relates to queer and Black identities?
Wow.
It's
I
a lot,
think
right? It's a loaded
that,
question.
yeah, it's a very loaded question, and I completely agree with trying to find a therapist that you feel like can relate to your experiences
Mhm.
as best you can. And I love that. That's something I've struggled with as well in therapy. I think my brain goes to the workplace a lot. I feel like in my immediate community, I'm also queer, so I feel like I have this queer community here in my city that I love and cherish deeply. And a lot of us are neurodivergent. Um, I have friends with ADHD, OCD, autism, like everything. And
Right.
it's beautiful in ways because we can all just say random things and relate to each other. So I find oftentimes my mental health feels more present to me when I'm in the workplace. And it's where I've had like the most negative experiences when it comes to just feeling the results of my mental health or the way I'm treated. So I think as a Black person showing up in those workspaces, for me, as a non-binary person, I'm being perceived as a woman by most people, and that's just a reality that I understand and have to come to understand.
Right.
Whether or not I choose to share that identity with people is up to me to feel safe, but
Absolutely.
I think the perception is like this person like will be a hard worker. I think there's this kind of stereotype placed upon Black women and femmes that like we're just very hard workers, that we'll always persevere. We don't need to take breaks. We don't need to make space for ourselves, or just the perception that we don't do that as much. I think people often want to see us in our stronger light and don't really want to be there for the weaker parts. And those weaker parts show up often for me in work. Sitting at a desk for hours and trying to focus is difficult. So
Yeah.
I have to get up a lot. And there's this fear of like, oh, well, if I get up too much, they're going to think I'm lazy. So I have to make sure I'm doing everything right so I don't be perceived as lazy, even though I'm accommodating myself here. It's also knowing that there's racial bias placed upon you no matter what. Like, even if you don't believe that there usually is racial bias present. So it's this feeling of walking in and feeling like you have to earn your place or earn, respect from your coworkers, from your boss or whatever,
Right.
on top of balancing the way your mental health is making you feel. And I think that can create a lot of pressure in the workplace, and that's my experience. So I think we could encourage more space for neurodivergent people in the workplace. I think jobs need to implement, how are you feeling today? Like, what's your energy level today? Do you need extra help today? Do you need to work with a team today? Or like, things like that, that a lot of companies or even local businesses, because I feel like I've worked at them all, don't think about. And instead, it feels like you are punished for the behavior that you can't help. You know what I mean? So I think there's a
Yes.
lot of work to be done there.
I agree completely. And I think bringing up being in the working world, especially as Gen Z is more so entering the working world now, is so important. I currently work from home, which comes with its own set of mental health challenges. But back when I was working in an office, I saw a lot of push from employees who were Gen Z to start incorporating mental health check-ins once a month that the company does with its employees, not to be invasive, but rather to show up to support their employees. What can we implement in your working day to day to help you, complete the tasks that you need to complete, but also feel good in doing so, not like you're just pushing yourself to the point of burnout, because that's not an expectation that should be set at all. And we had brainstormed some little ideas that might be fun for neurodivergent people. Stuff like, it would be nice to like have a little treadmill where you could go to the room and like walk on the treadmill for like, I don't know, 10 to 15 minutes, having a
Yes.
standing desk. So you could choose to sit at your desk, and sometimes you could choose to stand. And when I would have a standing desk, I would do little ballet plies that I learned many years ago, because it was a way to like multitask in my brain, which was more helpful, right? Or being able to listen to soothing music, being able to have, I don't know, a game day on Fridays during your lunch break with other employees, building that support and that camaraderie, I think is really, really good. And I'm just grateful that I've heard a lot more businesses and companies talking about this. And for the ones that haven't implemented yet, I feel like there's going to be a push for them to have to implement it in the future, because we're not able to keep up with this pace of just the 9 to 5 working to the bone. I mean, especially as women, we're starting to realize that women don't operate the same way as men. Who would have thought that? Especially with like how our month goes and how our hormones change and how that affects us our mental health. It's so important to acknowledge that, and our differing energy levels, especially as individuals too. Like on a day-to-day basis, where's your energy at? And if we could start asking these questions and encouraging companies to do it, I think that would be more helpful for our generation. And I think it naturally will start happening as Gen Z moves into leadership positions in the workforce as well.
Absolutely.
Awesome.
So, yeah. Marjhoree, did you have any thoughts you wanted to share in response to what we both just talked about?
I just think that's awesome. And I just also think I like what you said when you said Gen Z moving into leadership roles or moving up, because I know in my upbringing, a lot of my elders would be like, we had to work in the yard, and we had to do this, and we had to pick cotton. And it's like, you can't sit at a computer for 12 hours. And I'm like, I'm literally mentally drained. And just because my experience is not your experience doesn't mean that my experience isn't valid. And I think we need to, as a whole, hold space for that. And I think that plays well into inclusion. It's not just about race. It's about making sure that we're holding capacity for everyone's experiences, while also being productive. And, because we want to do what's best for the company at the end of the day. But like you said, we can't operate at 100% if our battery is at 50. And so I really like what you said. People standing on business and making sure that we're being intentional about taking the self-care, even if we're not working at a warehouse and we are working from home on a computer. I know if I'm looking at the screen for too long, I'll get a little stir crazy and I need to get up and walk around and get some sunlight or a change of scenery.
Right.
But if I tell my grandma that, she's like, well, I was in the yard for 12. Then I'm just like, okay, grandma. I just think just holding space for everyone else's experience and really listening to every individual as a whole so that we can operate as one, as a unit, so that we're able to provide those mental health services at 100%. Because that's one thing that I like to say. This is Saluna. It's a mental health app and everything. And employees need to be living by the book that we're preaching. And
Absolutely.
sometimes work gets busy, right? Sometimes we can get overwhelmed, but we definitely, I like that we actually are intentional about the things that we're sharing with others. I love that. And I feel like a lot of companies need to do that.
Yes, I agree completely. And let's be real for a second. Dealing with a mental illness in your day to day is exhausting. It's exhausting. And not only that, if you add on trauma, which a lot of people who deal with mental illness have trauma either in the form of it caused their mental illness, or because they had a mental illness and lived with that experience, having it undiagnosed, caused trauma. So it's one or the other. Healing from a lot of that trauma in your past is also exhausting. Going to therapy, doing the emotional work is exhausting. So having that support would be so helpful instead of having this, why are you stressed? You have no right to be stressed sort of thing that we've seen be told to us from previous generations, but really it was because it was taught to them from previous generations and it kind of trickles down. So something interesting that you brought up, Marjhoree, with your grandma telling you this and ancestry and all of that is generational trauma. So it's exhausting because we're dealing with our own mental illness and we're healing our own trauma. But for a lot of us in Gen Z, we are kind of the pioneers in breaking what they call generational curses as a term online. We're breaking these patterns that have happened in our ancestry or have happened in our company that we're working for now, of being totally dismissive of anything related to mental health or anything related to needing a break. And I think it's good to acknowledge that while it's great that someone will choose to go to therapy, and it's fantastic that they will go online and be vulnerable and share that they struggle with this, we also have to remind ourselves that it can be exhausting because being a pioneer is so lonely. You are trying to make a difference and change something. I know people who have been disowned by their family because they decide to speak up about mental health. I certainly know it's not something I can talk about with my family. So I want to know your guys' thoughts more specifically on generational trauma and how it's wild because you're doing something good for you by healing and getting support and trying to break this chain. However, you're also dealing with the backlash from family and a history of this is how we've always done it. Why can't you just do it that way? First, yeah.
I would like to say, generational trauma, that's super heavy, because just a personal story here of how I got viral on TikTok. It was a video of me and my husband reuniting from prison. And I had a lot of prison wives follow me on TikTok, and we built like this community. And me and my husband, we're very intentional on breaking generational curses and I don't like to say curses, patterns, generational patterns, and healing for the next generation. Because what's odd is my father is incarcerated too. And so even though the pattern showed up and it's found its way to the surface again, we were very intentional on reversing it for the next generation. And like you said, I want to say your healing journey is not a self-care spa day. It
Right.
is some really ugly truths that you have to face. How did I end up in this position? And how can I rewire my nervous system and my experiences so that I can give the best for my children so that they don't have to go through this?
Mhm.
And it's painful. It's painful before it gets beautiful. And I just want to say, like, especially with generational trauma, like, even with when I talked about like how my grandmother was out, she's 92. She wasn't her mother was probably picking cotton, even though she wasn't picking cotton. She saw her mother picking cotton, and she was in the segregation, and she wasn't able to speak up. And so there was no time for emotions, right? There was
Mhm.
no time for to speak how you feel. You just have to go out and handle your business instead of you getting beat. You know what I'm saying? Even though it didn't pass on to us physically, the pattern is still kind of there. And so just being intentional about those patterns so that you can help to heal the next generation. And like I said, it's tough, it's painful, it's not all rainbows, because I think sometimes social media takes as healing as a day at a spa or journaling. It's not that. I've
No.
been on some therapy calls, and I'm literally leaving therapy feeling worse than what I got on, but it's
Right.
necessary.
Yes.
So I just wanted to say that.
And I think it's so important because it's more of this realistic view, which we're seeing more of on social media, which is good, instead of this frilly kind of, healing era, healing girl summer, which is all great, and it has its place to encourage people to seek out healing, but it isn't all sunshine and rainbows. However, the payoff of going through these hard therapy calls or these hard journaling sessions, the payoff of it is creating a life where you can kind of feel more in control of it rather than letting your past trauma or behaviors you've been taught control you and how you react to things. Because I've been to therapy, I'm more aware when I get into like arguments with people where I'm acting as my parents rather than when I'm acting as myself. And I want to be more empathetic than my parents were. So it's being able to kind of call myself out on certain things, which isn't always the easiest thing to do, but it's so beneficial because it puts me in the driver's seat of my own life. And being in the driver's seat of your own life is a huge help when you're trying to find a life that is fulfilling. And everybody deserves that, right? Everyone deserves to feel loved and safe and fulfilled in their life. And it's when we kind of are able to hone in on who we are at our core and what is just a bunch of learned junk put on top of that, and kind of dig deep to find the core self, that we can choose things that align with us and create that kind of fulfilling life. Maia, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with everything both of you said, Marjorie. I think it's amazing that you were able to connect with people that have gone through a similar situation. I think that's a beautiful thing, and that is not something that would be on uh, a person's mind day to day, like that specific experience. Um,
Right.
I know it's not something that I've thought about before, like the just being the wife or being the child of someone who has been incarcerated. Like, so I think that's beautiful that you're able to build community in that way. Um, just wanted to say that. For me, generational trauma is something that I feel very passionately about. I think I would say for maybe a span of it's hard to know specific times, but from the age of maybe 12 to 13 until the age of maybe 20 years old, I'm about to be 25 now. I was raised in an abusive household. So my father is a narcissist, and not in the cute little internet speak. I think we like to bring up those words sometimes and they can lose their meaning,
Right.
but in the literal sense. And I think a big part of my healing journey, like Marjorie said, like getting down to that nitty gritty, getting
The root.
to points where you can be so uncomfortable like with yourself, and that that's difficult. But a big part of my healing journey is recognizing the reason why I was subjected to the abuse that I experienced. I've been able to gain empathy for my father because I know that that's a pattern of abuse. It's a cycle of abuse. So his mother treated him, and then he treated me the way he treated me. So it's absolutely up to me to watch the way I treat myself. I don't have children, and I'm not sure if I will have children one day. It's definitely on my mind, like things I would do differently. Um, but I think it's a matter of showing up for myself every day, learning where things feel in my body, recognizing I don't have to live in this constant state of fight or flight. What does that look like for me? Um, there are times when those of us with CPTSD or even anxiety can just be activated and tense. Um, and whether or not you have trauma, whether or not you're Black, there are certain things that feel like they were passed down to you. And um, I will say to anyone going through anything similar, any type of abuse, or people that have gone through abuse, you are not alone. There are people out there that know exactly how you're feeling, and someone like me knows how hard it can be to feel like a full person coming out of it, to feel like you know who you are, to know how to navigate early adulthood and life. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, it definitely does. And I just want to thank you, Maya, and also you, Marjhoree, for your vulnerability in sharing personal details about your life, because that's why we're here, right? It's so important to share things that will help people feel less alone and more understood in the experiences that they've had in their own life. So thank you both so much for your vulnerability. And Maya, to touch specifically on what you had talked about, as someone who also has dealt with a narcissistic parent and can see how that cycle was passed down.
Yeah,
I think,
you see it.
yeah, I trust me. I think it's so great to realize that in order to have that empathy for them. I mean, I would never tell somebody who's been abused that they have to forgive their abuser, right? But I think
Absolutely.
forgiveness can do a lot for us if we choose it. It's our choice as the person who was abused. And I think it's important to have those explanations of where their abuse came from and why it happened, not as an excuse or justification for their behavior, but as an explanation.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Something,
just,
sorry, go ahead, Marjhoree. Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I
No,
just
you're
wanted
fine.
to piggyback on what you said about forgiveness. It's really important because unforgiveness and resentment, you hold that in your body.
Yeah.
You hold that energy in your body, and you literally live out those feelings every day, whether it's through back pain or headaches or
Mhm.
stress, because you're holding that emotion in your body. And so when you really do the work, when you really do the root work and the healing, and you face the root of everything, you see someone as an actual soul, an actual soul. And like what Maya said, who went through what they went through and they just didn't have the tools to combat it or forgive whatever happened in their life and to face
Right.
it. And it brings a sense of freedom, and you kind of know that person outside of them being your father or your mother. You get to know them through a whole different, like a human to human, soul to soul experience.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. I want to piggyback on that too, if that's okay.
Go for it.
Um, I think forgiveness is a hard pill to swallow, and I definitely think for a chunk of my early 20s, I was so willing to just talk negatively about my father and the experiences that I had, just being subjected to all of it. I think there are certain times where, like you said, Lauren, you could never tell someone that they need to forgive another person, especially if it's an abuser, because it's such a difficult thing to come to terms with. But I think when you have the privilege of healing and being on a journey, whether you're talking to a therapist or for me, I had to be kind of self-aware and grow up pretty quickly. So that
Yeah.
aided me in a lot of ways. But understanding that that's another human being, or even if you break it down to like people in your community that are disliked by others, or someone who comes off a bit abrasive, like having experiences like what we've been through as people with mental health problems, it offers you an empathy and a new light that you see the rest of the world. Because for me personally, and I don't know if you guys have experiences too, I can't really look at somebody, even if they've done something kind of messed up, and be like, oh, well, just, screw them. Like, they're just a
Yeah.
bad person. There's systemic failures of our society that have played a part in how people are treated, how their brains develop. And I think I will say I'm grateful for the empathy that dealing with my own mental health has brought me for others.
I love the last thing you said. I am grateful for the empathy that dealing with my own mental health has brought me to have for others, because it's so true. And I feel like in terms of growing in a way that helps what other people say to you not have as much gravity or weight, the fact that I can see my father, who's the narcissist, as anytime he says or does something mean or hurtful to me now, I can kind of change it where I imagine this 8-year-old boy saying or doing that thing to me, and just crying, like scream crying, whatever it is that was done. And that just reframes my thinking completely, because even though my father is an adult and I can acknowledge he's responsible for his actions and what he chooses to do and not to do, I can also see this core part of him that was unhealed, especially someone who's big into inner child work and inner child healing. This core part of him that never had access to the resources in order to heal in the way that I'm able to heal today. So really,
Yes.
it's like you said, it's a privilege for me to have access to these resources and have access to social media and understand the language of it and how to navigate it in a way that my father and my grandparents never will. So they can't. That help doesn't feel as readily accessible to them as it is to me. But healing can help me, and forgiving them can help me to see where what they do can have less of an effect on me as I get older, because I know it has no basis in reality. For example, I'm just going to give a very light example. If my dad calls me stupid, very light example, I can see that has no basis in reality, and it's just a reflection of his insecurities of being seen as stupid when he was younger. And that just helps to navigate the world and problems and situations we run into in such a healthier way. And like I said before, putting you in the driver's seat of your own life. One of the last things I want to touch on, if it's okay to move on with you guys.
I want to say that I'm grateful for this conversation, because Lauren, that's pretty much my exact processing and healing experience with that. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course. Thank you.
Yes, me too. Grateful.
Oh, yeah. Of course, Marjhoree. Sorry to cut you off. It's a little hard when we're all remote and in different places and the timing's a little off. But one of the last things I want to touch upon in relation to social media is the dangers of self-diagnosis, because we kind of mentioned it at the beginning, but I think it's very important for especially teenagers who are scrolling on social media and looking to these influencers, right? And even if they are licensed therapists, they're still influencers if they have a big social media following and they're influencing and inspiring people. I want to talk about the dangers of self-diagnosis and how the online community can sometimes kind of make a nice packaged, pretty in a bow version of mental illness. You had mentioned it, Maia, a little bit you said, and I don't mean the narcissistic type of thing we see on social media where it's like it fits the social media language. There's sometimes, there's a huge complaint about OCD being presented as differently on social media than it is in real life and in all media. So I just want to talk about how we can kind of be more mindful as we're scrolling to, when we find things like videos that relate to us on a personal level, to not be so quick to be like, oh my gosh, am I autistic? Oh my gosh, do I have ADHD? Oh my gosh, is this who I am? And instead to take it as like information that can get you curious about figuring out if it is something that you have versus not. Because there's so many different things that my symptoms fall under in terms of mental illness, but what I'm actually diagnosed with is one or two specific things based on going to a mental health professional who has that education in order to diagnose someone. So whoever wants to take that first.
I guess I could take it first. This is something that I have dealt with directly. I remember learning I had CPTSD, and kind of under that umbrella is anxiety and depression that I experience, usually anxiety more. But once my TikTok algorithm started picking up on my interest in mental health videos, it kind of started giving me, oh, well, you could have ADHD, which I do, of course. But it kind of started showing me all these videos. Other videos were about like, these are signs that you have autism. And at times I would be confused because, like you said, a lot of symptoms tend to overlap.
Right.
And even with CPTSD and ADHD, I have some of the symptoms that people with OCD experience. So that had me spiraling for a little bit. So I think it's just a matter of being mindful when you're scrolling, that as beautiful as TikTok is, you are still watching content that can be curated to get clicks, to get likes, to get views, to get the maximum amount of people to interact with it. I think that is very important to remind yourself of. So if someone's like, here are signs that you may have autism, and it's like maybe things that you can identify with, but you're also not sure if these are common things maybe other neurodivergent people experience as well. I think it's good to kind of take note of it, maybe pay attention to things about yourself that make you question. And always do more research. I know it's hard because articles have paywalls everywhere, but even just, watching a YouTube video or finding a creator on TikTok who's a bit more specific about their experiences, a bit more mindful with their language, that really gives you more of an explanation than like, oh, if you do this, you're probably autistic or you probably have ADHD. I think it's just mindful consumption of content on TikTok. And also, if you don't have a mental health diagnosis, that's okay. If you are just a person who is neurotypical and sometimes you're anxious or sometimes you feel really down, it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a diagnosis.
Right.
And I think to wrap up, I think that Gen Z has definitely in some ways made it so accepting of mental health that it can feel like you're cool, like you're in on something to have a
Right.
diagnosis, because
You
it can
can
be
join this community.
Yes, exactly. And I just want to say, like, it's not all sunshine and rainbows over here. Like, we are going through it. And
Yeah.
if you don't have to deal with it and you just have occasional anxiety, or maybe you have a learning disability, different things that still require your attention and others' attention, just be mindful of that part as well. It's not cool, we're just trying to push it to the forefront so people consider what's going on.
Absolutely. And I think something else important to mention is that, like you said, people can struggle with anxiety sometimes or struggle with depression during certain periods. Maybe you're grieving or whatever it may be, but you might not be diagnosed with it. There is a difference between like having OCD and OCD tendencies, being a narcissist and having narcissistic tendencies. And but I feel that therapy is necessary for both. You know, even if you aren't diagnosed with a mental illness, just going to therapy is so incredibly helpful because it allows you to talk to this third party removed person who kind of has education and background to help you in kind of analyzing your life and your emotions and seeing where you can kind of take more control in your life. And I think that's so important. So I don't want anyone to feel like they have to have a mental health diagnosis in order to seek out therapy. There's still different kinds for different people, and it's incredibly helpful. And just because you struggle with a tendency doesn't make you any less, it's this weird kind of thought process, but any less than somebody who is diagnosed with mental illness. Like you said, it's not a place you want to be. The grass always seems greener, right?
Right.
Marjhoree,
Absolutely.
we'd love to hear your thoughts.
I think you guys wrapped it up all in a bottle, and I definitely agree with what you said. Those last two things were super impactful. I think you guys just took the words right out of my mouth.
All right. Well then, I want to offer to anybody who's watching kind of a place to go for everyone. So just to retouch on everyone's social medias, will you guys talk about yours again and what people can find on your page?
Sure. So I have Instagram. It's girlgetup.org, and it's just basically a sisterhood talking about healing, connecting with other mental health advocates and professionals, and healing as a unit and giving out tools. And then I have a TikTok too, Elizabeth __, and that's just showing like day in the life, relatable content and humor, all things mental health. And
love it.
Things like that.
My Instagram is starry.maya. It's just a place where I just try to be myself and post my art. I like to giggle over there too sometimes. Also bringing some awareness to current politics and the state of the world. My TikTok at Sad Pixie Girl, we have a silly time over there. Sometimes we get serious, and I want people to feel like, you know, they receive some kind of joy or get something out of anything I post. So yeah, whether it be mental health or me being silly. So
I love that, because I remember you said earlier that humor is a stepping stone for healing. There definitely is a place for humor in the healing realm of social media. In that same way, my name's Lauren. My TikTok is Lady Lauren Cassidy, and I have an Instagram and YouTube channel under the same name. And I make music and stories to help people heal from childhood trauma and learn how to create a life that is fulfilling for themselves. So Maia and Marjhoree, thank you so much for being here. And thank you again for your vulnerability, sharing your personal stories. I hope that people will check out your channels. I will definitely be sure to follow them. And I've just had such a wonderful time talking to you both.
Thank you so much. I had a great time.
I loved it.
Good. I'm glad. I'm glad we all had a great time talking about such a difficult topic, but something that is so important and so vital. So just lastly, for those of you watching, the Saloon app just launched and it's available to Californians ages 13 to 25, so Gen Z, and it's packed with multiple opportunities to learn, connect with a professional, and care for your brain. So stay tuned for at least one live event each month, which will be announced on the app. Saloon users can share topics and suggestions for future events through the app's feedback submission page. And you can access that by going to your profile settings at the bottom of the page and click Submit Feedback. And that's all. So thank you so much for tuning in. Maia, Marjhoree, you have a wonderful day and an even more wonderful weekend. And we'll see you guys next time.
Bye.
Bye.